Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. We are near the end of February, so I don't want to talk about a specific book, but rather I want to do the usual end of the month wrap-up and TBR for the next month, in this case, March. In terms of what I read in February, I thought I had a lot of good reads, a lot of stuff that carried over from January because it was simply too large, too hefty of a book. And I also managed to go to San Francisco and once again pick up books from a bookstore because I cannot be stopped. I simply love to pick up books. And so I managed to pick up two, one of which was Dune Messiah, which you'll probably see me talk about here in the near future. Dune Messiah was... it's a sequel to Dune, which I've read and talked about on this channel before. And I really enjoyed it. I think it's probably one of the better books that I've read for this channel. And the other book being Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And I read War and Peace by Tolstoy, and I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to look into another Russian author who has similar proclamations about greatness about him. And so hopefully what Dostoevsky has to offer is high quality. Based on what I know, it's much more focused than War and Peace is, whereas War and Peace focuses mostly on Russia and European history. I think Crime and Punishment will just focus on an individual. I could be wrong, and I'm more than happy to be proven incorrect there. But I look forward to reading those sometime in the future. But yeah, without further ado, let's talk about the wrap-up and the TBR, and we'll move on from there. So what did I read in the month of February? In terms of books, I read War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. That was a carryover from January. I thought it was very good and very complex. There's a lot of things that I talked about in the video that I made for it. But I do have some lingering thoughts, particularly about the writing of history, the act of writing it down, which Tolstoy says is very difficult, but he himself is trying to talk about history there. So a little bit of conflict there with what he's saying. Not that drags the story down at all. It's just we all have a tendency to write our own histories, I think. But Tolstoy is actually acknowledging that it can be flawed in some capacity. Also noting, I don't think I really noted in the video how much of this book was just trying to figure out the Russian identity. Because as the Codex Cantina boys said in their introduction to War and Peace, the book is really about the Russian identity and trying to figure it out, especially since Russia only recently, at the time the book was written, and at the time that it's about, it only recently, came into its own being as an actual country and as an empire. And so it was trying to figure out what does it mean to be Russian, what does it mean that we were invaded by Napoleon, what is the Russian identity there, and what is the relation of women to Russian men, a whole bunch of different ideas. I think it's something that Tolstoy wrote about, but he never quite nailed it down. And what's interesting is that so much history has happened in Russia, particularly as it pertains to revolutions and overthrowing of governments and various things like that. And so it's really difficult to nail down what the Russian identity is because it keeps shifting. What it means to be Russian is probably never going to be nailed down due to the nature of the country. But I feel like you could say the same thing about other locations as well. Just a bunch of other things as well about the book. But I'll leave it there. There's probably a whole bunch more you could talk about if you were to make a video about this or even just write about this book. I also read The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, which I thought was bad. It's really interesting because Batman Year One is actually a very interesting exploration of Batman, and that was written by Frank Miller. But The Dark Knight Returns turns Batman into a fascist, and it's bad storytelling, and the implications of it all are pretty awful when you think about it. But it's also interesting because, like, if you think that about this particular story, then shouldn't you think that about every single Batman story? Because this is just laying bare who Batman truly is and the implications of Batman. And if you think that, then should you think that about most superhero stories, which are about the powerful people being given government government permission to go and beat up other baddies, people who the government deems as bad. And so maybe if this is bad, or like if the Dark Knight Returns is bad, there needs to be a reckoning with comic books in general. I know it's certainly something that's laid bare in the Marvel movies that people have a criticism about. But here it's also prevalent, and it's something that maybe I should be considering, everyone should be considering as they read more comic books in the future. I also read The Banned Book Club, which was a graphic novel about a young woman's time in 1980s sort of fascist South Korea. I thought it was interesting. There wasn't a whole lot to it, so I didn't talk about it on this channel. I read Berserk Volume 8 by Kentaro Miura, which I thought was great. Really good exploration into what Guts wants in relation to Griffith and how he's not really capable of living in his shadow. Definitely a great series that's worth checking out. I also read Hope Was Here by Joan Bauer, which I thought was a bit bland. It's a Newbery Medal winner that I don't think really stands the test of time. Some interesting ideas that Bauer doesn't really care to go into, and it seems like she just writes a quick and happy ending. Not really something that other Newbery Medal winners have really done, which is present complex ideas and say sometimes these don't have an easy answer all the time. So probably one of the weaker young adult stories that I've read. I also read The Struggle for the People's King, which is about Martin Luther King Jr. and about how leftist and right movements co-opt his identity and what that means in the grand scheme of things. It's something that I've been thinking about for quite some time because, a lot of people talk about Martin Luther King Jr. and what he would have wanted and what his words mean for other movements. And I feel like at the heart of it, we kind of forget what King was actually fighting for and how that movement isn't really addressed. So pretty solid book. That was for book club, which I read with my friend Bevan. Definitely something, if you want to join, you can talk more about these kind of books with us. I also read Remember by Patricia Smith, which I thought was horrible. Not only was the writing and the characterization bad, but the underlying implications of the weird plot twist in the story suggest horrifying things for the characters in the story. It wasn't very good, and it comes across as like one of the worst books that I've ever read. So try to avoid that. And then I also read Death on Gokuman Island, which was a Japanese sort of mystery story. One in a series of stories. I bought it from a bookshop in San Francisco a while back, and I didn't realize at the time that it was the second book in the story, and I don't think that matters as much. It's an okay story, but there's not a whole lot of substance to it, so it's just fine and really nothing more than that. And then I also read, I'm also in the process of reading Spy Family Volume 4. I don't think I'm going to finish it by the end of February, so that's probably going into March. But I'm very excited to be reading the series and just making my way through it, because it is pretty high quality. Not as great as the Berserk series in my opinion, but it does have a lot of interesting themes and a very fascinating story that I love to see develop, and shenanigans and hijinks ensue from that. I also read a number of short stories for February, including The Lookout, which I thought was okay, The Marchers, which by Henry Dumas, which I thought was good, Green by Sefi Ada, another good short story, and The Start of the Affair, by a Somalian author whose name I forget. I'll put it up there. But I thought it was a great short story. It is certainly something very interesting about an exploration of an LGBT type of relationship, if you could call it that, between a man who I presume is a Westerner and a Somalian immigrant in South Africa. All of these were Black History Month picks from Black or African authors. And so all of them are worth checking out, but I think the best of the month is probably The Start of the Affair. So I recommend that. And similar to my short stories, all of the poems I picked for the month of February were by Black authors as well. So check out my Poetry Thursday playlist if you want more details on some of that poetry. But what do I plan on reading for the month of March? In terms of books, I plan to read I Am a Cat, which I have planned for February, but I didn't make it to it because War and Peace took up a good chunk of time. I also plan on reading, let me find this book real quick. I plan on reading Bunnicula, another book that I've had on my TBR for a little bit of time. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading this, as I read some other stories that were tangentially connected to it, but I didn't read Bunnicula itself in high school. It's young adult fiction, so again, always good to explore like what messages we're sending to young adults. Although this is fantasy, so probably doesn't matter as much, but it's still worth checking out to see if it holds up at all. A number of library reads. I also have planned American Gods, which I got from a bookstore in San Francisco. I've read it before, at least twice, and it was pretty good both times. So let's see if it holds up, and I just want to talk about it on this channel because I love talking about Neil Gaiman. I also want to talk about The Legend of the Condor Heroes, or I want to read it, by Jin Young, which was a recommendation to me from my friend Lucas over at The Bits of Lit. This was also on my 2024 TBR, so making my way through that little by little there. And then another book called On Our Best Behavior, which is a book about women, which was picked out by my friend Bevan for the book club, although technically I picked it out, but I always like to defer credit to her so that she can feel important and whatnot. But yeah, that's the book club read for this month. If you're interested, click the link in the description to join the Discord and ask questions about that. And we would love for you to be a part of it and contribute to the conversation about whatever On Our Best Behavior is. But given that it's International Women's Month in March, it's most likely going to be about women and women's affairs. So be on the lookout for that. I also have a number of short stories planned for the month of March, including from Sarah Jewett, as well as Dr. Seuss, specifically, Green Eggs and Ham, which is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while, but I haven't found time for, so be on the lookout for that. And then a number of poems planned, but one that I found during Black History Month that I didn't talk about was a poem by William Carlos Williams that really stood out to me. So I'm excited to talk about that. Anyway, that was the wrap-up and TBR for the months of February and March, respectively. Very interesting reads going on in March. Very excited to see if there's anything that stands out and might be a best of the year contender, or even just a high quality book, because not everything necessarily needs to be the best. Sometimes things can just be good or even minorly great or something like that. If you have any recommendations for me, I would always love to hear them, so put them in the comments below, and I will try to get to them when I can. It's always good to hear recommendations from other people. Other than that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about these books or this channel, to get the word out there and whatnot. Again, also join the Discord, which there is a link to in the description below. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and March-related travels. Farewell.